So I'm sitting here today with Max Vaughan from the Peak Distillery in Derbyshire. So thank you, Max, very much again for giving time and helping tell everyone the story about English whisky and yourselves.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
First of all, what are we drinking today, and why does this whisky tell your story best?
Yeah, well, I guess we'll come on to it. So we're White Peak Distillery. Our brand of whiskey is Wireworks. And this particular release is called Codoro X. We have a series of 3 core whiskies. This isn't one of them, but one of those core whiskies is called Codoro. Okay. This is a kind of extension of the Codoro release that we brought out to celebrate our 10th birthday in April this year.
Okay.
So the X stands for 10 years in business.
Right.
So it's 46.8% ABV, single malt English whisky, and it's a vatting of ex-bourbon barrels and the STR rejuvenated wine cask.
Great. Well, let's pour a glass.
Yeah.
Let's get into
it.
So I understand you and Claire both grew up in Derbyshire.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I guess you had careers in London, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we moved away for nearly 15 years. Not long after we met, actually. Those are fairly generous pours, but there we go.
That's all right.
Yeah, so we both grew up around here. We actually met around here, and I started my kind of working life in Derbyshire. I used to work for a firm of accountants. That's a steam valve. Yeah, I used to work for a firm of accountants called KPMG.
Me too.
Okay.
Started my career at KPMG.
Yeah, okay. So I worked for them in their local office whilst I was doing my qualifications, etc.
Yep.
And then moved down to London in 1997 with Claire. And we lived there for 15 years. Yep. All our kids were born down there, and then we decided to move back in 2010.
So was the coming back here for this, or coming back and then this came later? How did that?
Yeah, so it was more coming back for family reasons, and then this kind of followed shortly afterwards. I mean, I've been an adult lifelong whiskey fan, so whiskey had been part of my life for a long time. And I worked very close to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society tasting rooms in Farringdon when we lived in London. But yeah, we moved back. Yeah, we wanted to give the kids a taste of the countryside, which is what we'd grown up with, and then this came afterwards.
So you got back up here. Had you decided that you wanted to build a distillery, or was this like a brain worm that was working away in your mind, wanting to do something?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of that kind of brain worm and just wanting to do something different. I'd been working fairly hard for other people for 2 decades, and just thought I'd like to do something myself. And in between moving back and starting a distillery, I was still commuting to London, sort of 3 days a week. And I used to carry on going into the Scotch Malt Whisky Society tasting rooms. And one trip there, I think it was late 2011, I read a member's kind of brochure about a new distillery that was being set up in Battersea. And that just really grabbed my attention. At that point, I'd kind of, Scotch whisky was my thing, and I had no idea anybody was making any whisky in England. But I kind of read about this new startup in Battersea. Yeah. And I think I got home that evening, and I called Claire, because I was in London. I said, I've kind of figured out what we're going to do now we've moved back to Derbyshire. So that's kind of how it started. And then that kind of initial seed of a dream, it kind of took 4 years to get to the point where I kind of pushed it over the line.
Were you looking for locations during that 4 years, or you were just trying to figure out how you wanted to do it, what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out the size of the ask, because neither Claire nor I had got any experience of working in the drinks industry. And obviously, coming from a finance background, the setup costs were kind of foremost in my mind. could we, could this thing make any money? So I spent, 3 years or so literally building a business plan in Excel, as as a finance guy would do typically. But as part of that, I had to contact loads of people just to find out, well, in order to kind of do some projections for the distillery, I kind of had to understand the cost base and the kind of the operational process. So that's how I kind of got into it. And then over that time, I think I just became more and more convinced that it was something I wanted to do and that we could make this work in Derbyshire. And I'm sure, as you know, Chris, there's a danger you get too close to your own dream. And I was probably certainly in that spot at that time. Yeah. But we needed investors. And I think that's where the real step change came in terms of encouraging others that this was a good idea.
And did you went crowdsource? Is that where you went, or did you
so we did a crowdfunding 5 years ago, but initially I raised money through private placement. Okay. And I guess because of the kind of the career I'd had, I'd met a few people that perhaps had some disposable income, and so I went through my kind of contact list. I think I contacted 18 people with my business plan, which I'd kind of finalised by then, and 16 said yes. So that, for me at that point, that was a kind of I guess a major affirmation of what I thought was a great idea, because the vast majority of the people I approached decided they wanted to invest. And I suppose it's probably true that with a founder-led business, you're backing the founder. But we then got commitments, so then we started to plan in earnest, around the engineering piece.
And so when you were out with investors there, had you already found this location?
No.
You were going out with I'm going to build a distillery, I don't know where.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, looking back, when I was approaching investors, I'd already started having a discussion with a potential head distiller. So I could at least cover the basis that we would know how to make some whiskey, but we hadn't found the building that we're in now. Yep. That was a kind of the first kind of major step that we needed to make, followed shortly thereafter by ordering some of the long lead time equipment.
Yeah, I mean, this building is just, from what I've seen, is incredible. How did you come about this place? Did you just know, or someone tipped you off that this was here and undeveloped, or do you?
Yeah, so kind of one of life's happy circumstances. So right behind the distillery, so behind this wall that's just behind us, is an ancient woodland. It's called Shining Cliff. It used to be royal hunting grounds back in the day, apparently. But more importantly, or more germane to the story, in the 1990s, I used to mountain bike in these woods. Right. As a slightly younger and more agile man. I certainly bounced a lot better. And at that time, so the wireworks that operated from this site from 1876 to 1996 was still operating when I was mountain biking. Right. Albeit not at its kind of full-blown kind of operational output. But so I knew of this site, and one of the criteria that we had for a site was I wanted it to be by a river. I wanted it to be by a watercourse. That was, for me, just a kind of romantic view of where you should find the distillery. Yep. And of course, it's not always the case, but it's often been the case historically, because they needed the water source. So I wanted to be by a river. The River Derwant that flows past the front of the building is kind of Derbyshire's main river. And so this site, straight away ticked a big box to me. Right. So that's how I was aware of this site in the very early days.
So when you and Claire came in here, the first time you got in here, how much did you have to squint to sort of try and envisage a distillery in here?
Yeah, it was a mess. I mean, the wireworks closed in 1996, and I mean, they literally just closed doors and left. And then over time, various people, it seems, have kind of broken in and helped themselves to cabling, whatever else they could get of value. So we first came here in February 2016 to meet the landlord with the keys. And the space hadn't been occupied for 2 decades. I mean, it's when I look back, I sometimes, question my own judgment, not in terms of kind of being upset at where we've got to, but just what we took on was a huge project.
Yeah. And did you have to convince Claire, or were you both in it at the time going, this has potential?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Claire's certainly not put off by kind of hard work. And just prior to starting the distillery, we built a house together. So we'd been through this process of hard yards of building something. So we were slightly kind of, we'd had that kind of battle. But I think Claire in particular just loved the look and feel of the buildings, the kind of backstory of the wireworks. And I think what she saw, arguably more than me, was this becoming our brand home. Yeah. What I saw was a great space that kind of functionally would work well, and it was by a river. Yeah. So I think Claire had a kind of a slightly different view on how this is going to work for us. But so we both loved the space, probably for slightly different reasons.
Yeah, I really love the name. And the same, I think it was David Jenkins who designed this.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's designed our bottle as well. And it was actually this bottle that made me approach David and say, hey, look, I've seen this work, I love it. And then he was explaining the story of how that all came about.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. And David was, he was great to work with. I mean, we'd been making whiskey, and that's another part of the story, for quite a while before we decided what we were going to call the whiskey brand. We were kind of 2.5 years into laying down casks.
About the same.
But the great thing, David came down. He spent the day with us. I mean, similarly, he loved the place, and I think he just had that kind of period of absorbing, what it was like down here, and then the development of the bottle and the label. It's that was an 18-month process, but it very much was kind of born out of telling the story of the wireworks. Yeah,
I mean, we started laying down whiskey almost straight away from when we started our production in 22. No idea what we were going to call it at the time, and we just, because we went into a partnership with Theakston, so they're our brewing and malt, helping us with the malts and everything. And I think it was almost 2 years into that process, and we'd been thinking about what are we going to call this. Had the endless list of names of place and the history of Stamford Bridge and all these possible links to history and possible links to place. And then I can't remember, I think it was an afternoon, because he was so excited. Richard Bradbury, the MD of Theakston, rang me up and he said, look, I think I've been walking with my wife, and I think I've come up with a name. I thought, what do you think of 3 Ridings? And I went, I quite like that. And he goes, well, yeah, because if you draw a triangle from the maltings in Castleford to Massam and to Ellis Farm, the distillery, and you join all those up, they cross all the 3 Ridings. And I went, okay, cool, well, I get that. And it's one of those ones that just percolates for a while. And then she went, yeah, that's the one. And then it's sort of away you go.
And I like that. I think similarly for us, there's a bit of a departure there, I think, from the tradition of, let's talk about Scotch, because it's north of the border and obviously globally a powerhouse in whiskey making. But typically you'll find the brand of the whiskey is named after the glen where the distillery was based. And I think we decided to do something different, and by the sound of things, same for you. But there's a reason for it.
Yeah, and ours is the same, right? Because our philosophy that we've built into 3 Ridings is taking that flexibility the English GI gives us of being able to do what we're doing with Thomas Fawcett, Son, Theakston and ourselves, of being able to just pursue absolute best at each point. The Fawcett's have been malting for 216 years. Theakston's are coming up to their 200th year anniversary of brewing in Massam, and then we're the young guys who've come along and essentially bringing all that together. None of that could be possible in Scotland.
Yeah.
But we get to tap into just such generational knowledge on malting and such generational knowledge on brewing, because we wanted to come, and I think it probably segues nicely, we wanted to come out in a very similar way to you, which is flavour.
Yeah.
So we've developed, the malts that we've chosen, which Theakston and our master distiller designed to create this porter style beer. It was designed to create a great tasting beer.
Yeah.
And then from there, try and distill and take as much of that flavour and character through, and eventually then use woods to complement what the spirit is. Very, very different cost structure.
Yeah.
But the name is essentially, taking in the whole of the Yorkshire region, because we've limited ourselves to Yorkshire grown barley.
Yeah.
And then malted, brewed, distilled and aged all within the 3 ridings. So that's sort of, it's a bit more regional than where you've gone with yours.
Yeah, and there's certainly some parallels with, what we're doing here. I think, we're the first whiskey distillery in Derbyshire, and or at least the first legal distillery.
Yeah.
But there's a huge history of brewing. So, and that was something that I kind of thought about a lot in the early days in terms of how we were going to make whiskey. What were the kind of elements of the whiskey we're making here that is going to have some links to Derbyshire. Yeah. So we too work very closely with the brewery. We're doing all of our own mashing and fermentation and making our wash here, but we use spent brewer's yeast in our fermentation from Thornbridge Brewery. So they are 15 miles up the road in a town called Bakewell in the Peak District. They make a great IPA called Jaipur, which I think is celebrating its 20th or 22nd birthday this year. And so every week since we started, so over 8 years, we go up and they crop some spent brewer's yeast for us, and we're pitching that into our fermentation. So I think we have therefore kind of got this kind of connection with the brewing industry in Derbyshire. But I think we then kind of we extended from there. So we started to think about kind of creating flavour in spirits. And I think the traditional viewpoint has been you can create a spirit relatively quickly and just get it straight into a cask, and that's when all the kind of magic happens. And partly because I got no background in whiskey making, when I was kind of building my model, I had to get into the weeds with every single stage of the process and asking a lot of, well, why do you do that, and et cetera, et cetera. And so we started to look at, how can we create some interesting flavour through the way that we mash? How can we create some interesting flavour through the length of fermentation, the yeast that we're using, the still design, the speed at which we run our stills, all the cut points, all that kind of thing. And I think that was very much focused, and that's really been our mantra all the way through, is looking at that flavour piece before the spirit goes into the cask. Yeah,
absolutely. Amen. That's the exact same philosophy we're coming at. I started Ellis Farm originally because I was making cider at home, made too much, started distilling vodka, well, not really vodka, but tried to make vodka at home, and with the idea that a great tasting cider could then be turned into a good vodka. And then we took the same philosophy into the whiskey. Was the principle was to make a great beer with loads of flavour, and then almost like try and bring them, protect them on the way through. Then keep complementing. So we do exactly the same thing. So our low wines taste fantastic. They taste like Maltesers, digestive biscuits, and then you get to the base spirit, the new make is just suddenly all the fruit characteristics that come through from those malts, all these banana flavours and all sorts of things. And then we just trying to delicately get that matched with the right woods so that it's not just wood
Yeah.
wanged on top of a base clean spirit.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a really important point. I think, Chris. I think on the one hand, we can all access the same casks and barrels, and that for me was one of the reasons why we were much more focused on the kind of front end in terms of flavour creation. Because if you can all access the same barrels, then what is your point of difference, and therefore it becomes that what we refer to as the whiskey making part of the process, which in our case is a 10-day process. But equally, I think you're quite right, and we think about, well, what are the cask types that we think are going to suit our spirit, rather than, well, let's just buy everything we can get hold of and we'll see how that flies. And for sure, we've done some of that, but the core of our warehouse, 80% of our cask types are two. They're either first fill ex-bourbon barrels from Heaven Hills Distillery, and we're very lucky, we've always been able to source those direct from day one, or the STR cask. But even that has been a kind of interesting journey for us, because once we'd spent some time with the cooperage where we get them from in Porto, it became very clear to us that the STR cask is not a generic cask type. There's just so many variants. So even in this space kind of where we're sat, we've probably got 6 different varieties of what people would generically refer to as an STR cask. Yeah. But they've got different toast and char levels. Yeah. They've got different kind of combinations of American and European oak. But all, I guess over time, we've built up this sense of there's a cask style here that suits our spirit. And thinking about how those two things complement each other is important. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned American oak there. Now, I understand one of your sort of people you engaged with was an American distiller. Yes. Rather than the more traditional. Everyone else is like, well, this person in Scotland was my mentor and my inspirer, or my Jedi master. You had someone from the American. Yeah, right? And that was kind of maybe partly because I was a bit of an industry outsider. So, all of these contacts I was having to make in the early days were kind of very fresh. But also I had a sense in which there was a danger if we went for a lot of our advice kind of north of the border, which would have been an obvious choice, and we'd have got good advice. But there was a danger that we'd have built more of a kind of Scottish kind of philosophical distillery here in England. I think that would have been a mistake in the sense that the Scots are very good at making Scotch whisky, so why take them on head on at what they do? But I think more importantly, it would have been an opportunity lost, because I was setting this thing up to hopefully be a commercial success, but also be something that interested me, that I kind of felt passionate about. So I decided that I would look elsewhere for my influence. And I think one of the things that just I thought about early on was there was a craft distilling scene in the States, and a bit like craft beer, it was probably at least a decade ahead of the UK, maybe even longer. And so I was reading about things online that was happening in craft distilling in North America, and in particular whiskey, and none of which had got this kind of influence from a powerhouse north of the border. People were just imagining what they could to make great spirit. Yeah. And I kept reading about this guy called Chip Tate, who started Balcones Distillery in Waco, Texas. He just appeared to be in many articles when they were trying to elevate, sort of distillers within the industry. So I reached out to Chip via LinkedIn, and I ought to ask him one day why he decided to accept my invite, because my profile at the time had got nothing to do with drinks or spirits. But I just said, look, I'm thinking of starting a distillery in the middle of England, a place called Derbyshire. I'd love to kind of pick your brain. And he responded very generously and said, yeah, sure. He said, look, I'm starting my second distillery, so I'm pretty busy, but if you want to come over, I'm happy to spend some time with you. So So I booked my flights. That was January 2016. And then I'd booked my hotel. And then I called him again and I said, I messaged him and said, Chip, look, I'm really coming, just for the avoidance of doubt. This wasn't a joke. He said, yeah, it's fine. And he said, look, I've spoken to my wife, come and stay with us. And that was pretty cool. We'd never met. And so I spent 5 days in Waco with Chip. A lot of the time I was holding welding rods because he literally made his own stills. But we spoke a lot about whiskey, and I was very fortunate to have hours every day and in the evenings just to chat and chew the fat, both on whiskey making, what it was like to start your own distillery, to start your own business. And Chip gave me, I guess just kind of notched up my confidence that, I can do this. And also gave me some great advice that I came home with. So literally I did that trip, came home, said, right, we're doing this. I need to raise some money. And then, kind of never looked back.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, a couple of years back, I was forming this view that, particularly when the cask there was a period, I think it was about 2-3 years ago, where they got really tight, hard to get, particularly the first fill bourbons. And I was like, why is this? And it seemed like there was suddenly this growth in American single malts. This sort of suddenly was coming.
Yeah.
And I just thought, that's a beast if that wakes up, because it potentially is enormous, but it doesn't seem like it's sort of really got into mainstream. Maybe just because American whiskies are, they're so used to bourbons. And
I think that's right. I mean, obviously American single malts, it's got its own designation these days, hasn't it? But I think for various reasons that we don't necessarily need to dwell on, but I think globally the whiskey market's going through some turbulent times.
Yeah.
I think certainly it seems none more so than in kind of domestic bourbon brands in the US, and so maybe that's kind of put the brakes on a little bit on the kind of American single malt thing.
Yeah. Now you're talking a little bit about your your focus on sort of philosophy, and I guess craft is probably not. I'd say craft is a word that's double-edged, and I mean craft in a sense of the positive of the attention to detail, the focus on quality rather than small and the other side of it, which is a little bit sort of that. Where do you see sort of from a business standpoint? You obviously had your business plan, and good old spreadsheets are fantastic when you're a finance person like me. Mine was completely wrong. I got it wrong so many times. I still have my original spreadsheet. I was so far off in terms of numbers. Where are you on that sort of journey from a business standpoint? And do you see this as a generational thing for you and your family, or how are you sort of thinking about what this leaves as a sort of a legacy beyond getting this to where you are now, which is obviously winning some great awards, showing that you can make some amazing whiskey. Where do you see this going for yourselves?
I wish I'd asked myself some of those questions, 10 years ago, because I think it's sometimes useful to have a couple of North Stars that you have.
A why is always a good question to ask.
But I think for me it was definitely a kind of passion project. I think then we figured out a way that we thought it could be successful commercially. Absolutely, where the reality of where we are today is very different to what I'd projected all those kind of years ago.
Where were your big mistakes? What did you get wrong?
Yeah, I think I had a couple of people say a couple of different things to me that they've never left my head. One was, Max, you can get your head around what the whiskey industry maybe domestically looks like today, but bear in mind you're going to be facing your commercial challenges not in this market, but the one that exists in 10 years' time and beyond 10 years' time. Yeah. So, how do you imagine what that's like? No one's got a crystal ball. But that was very kind of sage advice. And then the other kind of, it wasn't necessarily advice, it was just a comment. And the comment was, Max, look, And this was someone that invested in the business. You know, I've no doubt you'll raise the money. I've no doubt you'll pull all this together. You kind of de-risk it from an operational point of view, and you'll probably make great whiskey. I think your challenge is going to come selling your goods at, you know, whatever scale you want to in that longer term. And I think when I look back now, I think that's turned out to be true. Because most of the other risks with, I think, decent planning, you know, the right amount of passion, you know, getting, you know, good people around you, and yeah, hopefully having enough, you know, money to make it kind of get going. Most of those risks you can manage.
Yeah.
I think once you start kind of facing the market, then you realise where the hard yards are, and we're certainly still in that phase. You know, we launched our first whiskey in February 2022, so just over 4 years ago, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved during this period of time, especially because the market's been in a kind of, yeah, it's been in a difficult state.
Shit. It's the worst market in spirits for generations, I think. The last 3-4 years, we've been facing the same thing. We started selling Dutch Barn in 22. Yeah. It's a terrible market. Yeah. Everything is in decline, everything is down, and you can't find a single good news story.
No, absolutely. And I think, and you know, there's all kinds of things that have changed over time, and certainly, just kind of generational changes and kind of attitudes to just purchasing consumer goods and also to alcohol. And then, you know, things like kind of COVID kind of, you know, accelerating the direct consumer online sales, and then, you know, all those things have crashed back to normal. It's been a pretty shit time, but I think we've managed to navigate those choppy waters, let's say reasonably well. You know, I'm kind of going to give myself or the business, you know, maybe a 7 out of 10. I think, you know, beyond that, you know, that would be very impressive if anyone can kind of claim above that. Yeah. But certainly one of the very important things for us is this brand home. And so allied to that, our direct consumer sales, and that whole channel, whether it's bricks and mortar through our distillery shop or online through our website, we're at a scale where that's still very important to us. Yeah.
And I think the thing that happened for outside of the mega brand houses who just don't bother with D2C, they just don't see it as relevant, it gets in the way of their relationships and everything like that. I think COVID changed that fundamentally in the way that people buy, particularly premium spirits. Yeah. I very, very rarely buy a bottle of premium spirits other than online now. Yeah. Now I'm obviously a particular kind of consumer, but I think the idea, if you're able to now research a brand, and particularly with a whiskey like yours, you want to understand the story, you want to understand the people, the processes and everything. You do all that research and then you go, I'll try a bottle of that. Yeah. That's just changed. Yeah. Pre-COVID, you went to the liquor store or the supermarket, and that's where you bought your whiskies or your premium vodkas. Our biggest channel is D2C for our vodka. Yeah. That has fundamentally changed. Yeah. And I think it's something that's just going to continue to grow, particularly in this segment that we're in the premium whiskey space. I think so many consumers are just going to live there. And it is one of the challenges I was talking to Dan about the other day in terms of English whiskey, is you can't walk into a supermarket and see an English whiskey section in the UK. And it's probably because you just won't make any money there. Yeah. And you've got to compete against the Scots, the Irish, and all the cheap whiskies that are available. And then you get stuck into the buy on discount cycle, which just can kill a brand. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've, you know, mentioning no names, but, you know, we've had a listing in a kind of, let's say a higher end kind of supermarket type brand, and it didn't work for us. And actually, you know, we could have tried to chase our tail, and then, you know, I started to understand a lot better that, you know, a lot of the volumes are when things are on promotion, and so you're making even, you know, less kind of margin. But yeah, direct to consumer, really important part of our business. I think
there's a double-edged sword there. I think it's because of the advent of the online world that we live in, kind of social media, mailing lists. Our businesses have been able to access the consumer in a way 20 years ago we wouldn't have been able to. The only access point was really on trade, getting people behind the bar to be talking about your booze.
Yep.
The world we're in today, we can do that directly. And so that gives you an opportunity that didn't exist before. But at the same time, the barriers to entry have come down. So it gives more people the opportunity to do exactly that. And we've seen that competition in England, and I think it's I think there's space for most of the English whisky brands. I think a lot of them are relatively small. I mean, we're small in Scottish terms, but I think if your business is relatively small and, let's say, looking at your regional market, then there's probably a great model there for you. I think if whatever it is, 70 of the English whisky distilleries were trying to compete, nationwide and internationally, then that would be a lot more challenging for any one of us, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, one of the joys I've had so far, just even the fact we're sitting down here today is testimony to where English whisky is. I think in that one is you had the experience with Chip in terms of he was just willing to help. That's a general thing that seems to exist across all distilling, which I really like. Is people want to help, they're open. Yeah. Very rarely will you come across folks who are like, no, this is no, we're not going to talk. It's competition. Yeah. Most people are like, yeah, cool. Let's sit down and have a chat. I mean, the fact that we're all sitting having these chats is fantastic because I think I try to describe it as an industry, we are so tiny and we're so early in such a long-term industry. Is the competition is outside the walls. Yeah. And it is, the Scots, the Irish, the Americans, the Japanese, and everybody. Yeah. That the fact that there's this many English whisky distilleries is still nothing because we're all tiny. Yeah. No, completely. Like we're minnows in the context. Is how the challenge, and I think Andrew was talking about it a bit, was the challenge is to get to the point that you go into a New York bar and there's an English whisky section and there's like 5 or 6 English whiskies there. Yeah. That's a great result for the industry. Yeah. But we're a fair way off that. Yeah. And it's how do we go from where we are now to there and not think that slinging punches at each other is the... Which I don't think anyone is. No. There might be the odd person who sort of thinks that way, but that idea of like together we're so much stronger. And then it's eventually at some point it will... we'll start getting a little bit competitive, but that's probably the next generation. Yeah. It's not us. Yeah. It's interesting because I think certainly when I was starting off, I found lots of good advice from people within the industry. By and large, there was a lot of advice coming from the kind of Scottish, whisky industry, and then also in North America. But I kind of reflected at that time that I was often talking to people who were, let's say, 200 years down the road in a business that had been founded, and perhaps, just in kind of commercial finance terms, didn't have an ownership interest that might kind of, slightly mean that they alter what they're prepared to share with you. And I found people were very generous. I think large box is a hard industry to be successful in, and people are happy to share whatever insights they've got. But what's been interesting to me in English whisky is that seems to have carried on, and I would share exactly your views, notwithstanding the fact that most of our English whisky colleagues are founder-led businesses. So you're talking to the people that have got the skin in the game and the most to win or lose. But still seems to be a kind of characterised as a scene where people are happy to kind of cross-fertilise and share information. I think ultimately, I hope with the aim of maintaining good standards, because I think that's in all of our interests, right? I mean, even if
even if we can't be on that, the bar list in the New York bar, if the general perspective is that the English Whisky distilleries are making decent whiskey, then I think that helps us all.
Yeah, and that is an interesting, I think, observation about the fact that we're in this, and Andrew and his dad started the ball rolling, right, 20 odd years ago, that we are in the generation where nearly every business is founder-led in English whisky. The next generation starts changing, and then you'll be 2-3 generations down the road. Weirdly, I hope that these little videos that we're popping on YouTube, where we're actually capturing some of the founders-led stories, they'll be around in 20, 30 years, and everyone can look back and go, what were those idiots thinking? Which is, I think that's quite cool.
Yeah,
quite
no,
cool,
definitely.
Right?
I mean, lovely idea. And and I guess it kind of, I can't remember which question it was, but part of one of your questions as we extended into this discussion was, what do we hope for the business? I think we don't view this necessarily as a generational business. I personally, I think Claire and I, would like to see our kids, rowing their own boats. But I think we do have a very long-term perspective. So, we talk, when people come visit the distillery, we talk about the wire works that existed here for 120 years. And, I'd like to think people are talking the same terms about us in a century. And so we do tend to have that perspective, what is it that we want people to look back on and that we can be maybe proud of, even though we won't be around to experience it. And I think that kind of long-term perspective, I think is necessary in whiskey, but it also starts to condition, some of the decisions you make in the day-to-day. Yeah.
Now, moving on to some of your successes. So if I get this one right, so you won recently the Whisky Exchange Whisky of the Year of 2026, is that right?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
How did that feel when you got that email or that call?
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Is that what you would regard as the highest accolade you've got so far, in terms of that process?
I would say so. I think, we're proud of what we do day to day, and we're proud of, all the kind of, awards and achievements that we've been fortunate to receive. But I think that particular one, it involved 50 of the Whisky Exchange's customers getting together in 2 bars or 2 of their stores in London, and tasting through a shortlist. I don't actually know how the shortlist was put together.
Was it blind?
It was blind.
Yeah, that's always good.
And I won't mention the brands. Those other brands are actually mentioned on the Whisky Exchange website, but the rest of them were all Scottish, and there were 18-year-old single malts on there. And from that blind tasting from some of the Whisky Exchange's, let's say, knowledgeable customers, they voted for Wireworks Bourbon Barrel. And I was just blown away when I found out we were shortlisted. And the buyer at the Whisky Exchange, Dawn Davis, she called me and said, Max, look, just want to give you a heads up. You're on the shortlist for Whisky of the Year 2026. But I need to talk this through with you because, we've been supplying the Whisky Exchange for a while, but she said, look, I just need to understand, if you were to win, you might see an uptick in your sales, but are we going to have any inventory issues with you? Because if we are, I need to know that. And so, and the answer to that is absolutely not. I mean, crazy kind of financial turn of events, but we've probably got 30 years of stock in our warehouse. But so we made the shortlist, and I just thought that would probably be the last time I heard of it. And then when we found out we won, it was just just a hugely kind of proud moment for the whole team, I think. And it's certainly been, it's been the biggest kind of award or recognition that we've received, because it's continuing to roll throughout 2026. And it's just really helped in a massive way kind of elevate brand awareness and the sales aside, the kind of the awareness and the fact that the whiskey's good. And I think hopefully that means something for the whole of the English whisky scene. I mean, we're not the first brand to be making some first with kind of, high, industry awards.
There's a couple in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
It's been great to see. Right?
Yeah, and it's been amazing to see. So I think it's just kind of adding to that noise that, the distilleries in England are making some good whiskey.
Yeah. Now I'm coming up to my first release. This is all part of the build-up to a dinner in October, on the 23rd of October.
Right,
where
exciting.
I'm going to be inviting 100 people. Hopefully you'll come along.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we don't have the whiskey yet.
Right.
Liquid's all, we're good with the liquid, but all the other bits in that. But I'm interested in sort of your first release. Obviously, might understand you were selling gin and other things along the way while you were waiting to get to that point.
Yeah.
But when you got to your first release, how did it feel, and how did it feel compared to what you thought it was going to feel like when you finally crossed that line?
Yeah. So, I can remember a specific moment very well to this day, but just winding back the clock, when we were coming up to, so we'd been through the process with David Jenkins, we'd had the bottle made, all of those things were coming together, with at the 12th hour, which is usually the case with a small business. Yeah. But what happened during those kind of COVID times, there was a shortage of glass. Because I think a lot of the bottle producers, like many of us, had no idea what this COVID thing was going to mean to their business. And a number of them, as I understand it, they shut down their plants, erring on the side of caution. Turns out, generally for kind of whiskey sales, it wasn't kind of a major cliff drop. And so they eventually turned their plants back on. But there was a shortage of glass in a period of time when we were contemplating our first release. So we delayed our first release we'd earmarked actually it was October of 2021, and we had to flip it back into February 2022 because we could not get the glass.
Yeah, right.
And what that meant was that I think when we got to the actual release day, there was a sense of relief because there had been so many things that we'd been having to focus on, and some things we couldn't control around getting hold of whiskey bottles. Obviously, the great thing about whiskey is it's got no sell-by date, so if we were making beer, that would have been perhaps more of a concern.
Yeah.
But by the time we'd actually been able to put a pin in our release date, it just coincidentally was that I'd booked to go to a whiskey bar in Birmingham, a great whiskey bar that sadly had to close, but it's reopening very soon. And I'd certainly encourage anyone going to Birmingham to go to Amy Seaton's new whiskey bar when it's ready. Mm-hmm. But Claire and I had booked to go there and stay the night in Birmingham and just enjoy whiskey, away from the pressures of doing our own thing. Mm-hmm. And when I booked it, I kind of, in my mind, we'd already had released our first release. As it turns out, the night we were booked into the whiskey bar was the day of our first release, or the weekend of our first release. So we walked into this bar in Birmingham, and there was 2 or 3 people sat at the bar. And as you often find in whiskey, the bottles are all in front of them so they can read the labels and kind of, to some extent, kind of geek out on the information they're interested in. And one of these 3 or 4 bottles that this group of people were enjoying was our whiskey.
Awesome.
And it almost brings me to tears now, because that was the first time I'd seen our product out in the wild being enjoyed by people that didn't know who I was, probably weren't that sure where White Peak Distillery was and why the brand was called White Works. Yeah. But I still remember that, and I'll probably never forget that moment for the rest of my life. So that's what I remember from our first release.
Cool.
And the logistical issues. I mean, our first release I think was 5,000 bottles. We sold roughly half of it direct to consumer. So our first real introduction to retail dispatch from here was trying to ship 2,500 bottles directly to people with DHL.
We know that pain.
And to add to all of the pain, our labelling machine didn't work. So the first 20,000 bottles of whiskey that we ever sold, these labels were all put on by hand.
Hand label.
Yeah, and because the bottle's tapered, the labels have to be curved.
Yeah.
And so put them on by hand to make sure that these elements match up when they wrap round. Anyway, so
I've got that joy coming, 'cause I know we're hand bottling our first 1,000.
yeah,
So.
and
hand
we
labeling
all go
everything,
through
right?
these
So,
things. Yeah, it's a rite of passage.
So I'm building 3 writings from scratch. Question for you then is, if you could go back to the beginning, what's one thing you would fundamentally do different?
One fundamental thing I would do differently, I would have put in a slightly bigger mash tun and equipment to mash. I mean, I'm really happy with the whiskey that we're making, but in terms of giving the business kind of operational flexibility, that's probably one thing I would have done slightly differently.
So just a process bottleneck.
Yeah,
effectively.
yeah, and it's not that it's not so much that that it's a bottleneck for us right now, because it isn't. It's just there's certain things like the malt gets delivered in 1 ton bags. So have a mash tun that's a multiple of a ton. Even if it's just 1 ton, that's absolutely fine. Our mash tun is 0.7 tons.
Slightly annoying.
Yeah, and that's slightly annoying. That was a decision that was taken perhaps with too much of a financial head in terms of the cost of stuff.
Yep.
And then you realise as you get going that actually to build a slightly bigger plant, even if it's 30% bigger, it doesn't cost 30% more. It might cost 15% more.
Yeah.
So I think if I had my time again, I would do that. Because of course, even if you've got a slightly bigger mash tun, it doesn't mean you have to operate it every day. Maybe you operate 3 days a week instead of 5.
Yeah.
And if things go well, it gives you that kind of the ability to increase your output.
What's the hardest part of building a whiskey that nobody sees?
I think there's a lot of commonality with just running your own business, that whether it's whiskey or other things, I think when you're the founder and perhaps when resources are somewhat limited, there's a lot of balls to catch. Maybe looking at kind of through what I was planning to do with rose tinted spectacles, I thought I would try and spend a day a week in the still house making whiskey. That kind of never happens. Now, there are other people that are better at doing that than me, but it's my business. I started it because I love whiskey. Why not spend some time making whiskey? So I think, a lot of the things that people don't tend to see, they're not very glamorous, but I think it's the common thread, I think, is if you're a small independent business, then as a founder you kind of have to catch those balls. I think there are some ways that you can perhaps try and solve that, and I think if you can be well capitalized to have maybe a little bit more flexibility to employ 1 or 2 more people to help with those things, then that's fine, and that can be, I think, very helpful. Obviously that comes at some cost somewhere else, because you're either giving away more equity, or your cash burn rate is much higher in the early years, and it's getting those balances right.
Yeah. Now, moving back to English whisky, where do you think we are with the GI, and what's your perspective as a sort of a member of the guild, and how that's sort of playing itself out? Yeah,
I mean, I'm a big advocate of what the English Whisky Guild's trying to do with the GI. I think, I can totally get there's going to be there's a sense in which you can't please all of the people all the time, and we certainly know that with our business. But I think the fundamentals for me are about trying to maintain a good quality standard for English whisky, and at the same time try and foster innovation. And at some point those two things can clash heads a little bit. But I think the the general themes about, if you're making English whiskey, then what is it about that that's English? And those are things that I think the EWG are trying to promote. And I think what you're doing is, in my head, is totally fine. The wash may be being made off-site, but it's still, in your case, it's using very local barley, a very local maltster. What's not English about that? So it doesn't mean you have to do everything on one side. But if we look at an extreme example, if it wasn't for things like what we're trying to include in the GI, then importing spirit from, I don't know, Canada, sticking it in a cask and then bottling it years down the line could be classified as English whiskey.
Yeah.
Now, is that right for the consumer? Is that slightly misleading? So I think
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think a lot of all the things that the EWG are trying to achieve with the GI, I think are well intended, and they're kind of hitting, to my mind, these kind of key questions about what is it that we want to kind of ensure the consumer is kind of benefiting from when people are using the term English whiskey.
Yeah.
But in terms of where it is right now, I think because of various different challenges, not least of which from the SWA, it's being held up at DEFRA essentially, who the body that are there to kind of approve it.
Yeah.
And I think I, to some extent I can understand why it is the kind of SWA behave like they do. They've got a hugely valuable brand in Scotch whisky, and they defend that vehemently. And I think that's the perspective they come from. Yeah. I just think it's disappointing. You've already mentioned it, Chris. We're a small industry. I think what's really interesting is we're trying to get together in the early days and kind of set out some guidelines what English whiskey should be, as opposed to the Japanese whiskey industry that have been going for 80 years before they started to have these conversations.
Yep.
And then those conversations are conditioned by what's in your warehouse and what you've been doing.
Yep.
Whereas now I think there's the sense in which we've got a bit of a clean sheet, and maybe we can try and put our best foot forward. So yeah, I'm strongly behind the GI and what the EWD are trying to do. I think it's kind of, I'm personally disappointed that the SWA don't buy into the fact that everything there is to elevate quality and be transparent on what it means to call something English whiskey.
My view is I don't think they should even have a voice.
Yeah.
Because it's not relevant. Because they're already Japanese single malts, American single malts, Australian. The term is already out there and used, and it's then defining, as you described, it's for the consumer to understand what is an English single malt, what is an English whiskey.
Yeah.
That's up to us to decide. It's nothing to do with the Scots.
Yeah.
And I think it's anti-competitive, and the behaviour they're doing is, and also completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Because they should be so confident, just sit back and go, we're fine.
Yeah.
We're Scottish whisky. Everyone knows who we are. Yeah. Everyone knows what we stand for. They can define that. They've done that. They've got pretty strict rules, but some pretty loose rules. Where does their barley come from?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cheapest possible in most cases, right?
And sometimes from England.
England, France, Ukraine, Russia, wherever they can get it, right? And we're deciding to restrict in certain areas, which I think are beneficial for the consumer. It's an unnecessary space, but I don't understand why they're doing it. It doesn't achieve anything for them.
No,
it achieves zero other than headlines.
Yeah,
and in effect probably is beneficial for all the English whisky distilleries because of the headlines.
Yeah, no one had heard of the GI before the SWA started objecting to it. Yeah,
no, that's right. Why don't we let's move on to the last drop as we get to the last drop. You've got your way. You've got
I've been racing ahead. Drop. Yeah.
It's a delicious whiskey, though. I think I'll have to take a bottle of that with me. Right, so this is the last drop. So Max, here we go. So quick questions, quick fire, and I've added a few extras in this time just to add some more depth to this one. So, favourite whiskey you didn't make?
Bruichladdich, generally speaking.
Oh, right. One distillery you admire?
I'm going to go with Bruichladdich again. Sorry, that's I won't mention them again, but yeah.
Most underrated part of whiskey making?
I mean, I think that mashing and fermentation piece.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's become more of the conversation, but historically hasn't been.
Most overrated part?
I think casks can be overrated.
Natural cork or not?
We are natural cork.
Bourbon or sherry?
Bourbon.
Ice or no ice?
Depends. In single malt, no ice. I like ice in bourbon.
Scottish or Irish?
Scottish.
Japanese or American?
Japanese.
Single malt or blended?
Single malt.
Peat, no peat?
Peat.
Favourite type of barley?
We've just done a Chevalier release, so I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
We love that.
Favourite cask type?
Just the very simple first fill ex-bourbon.
Dream person to share a dram with?
I'm going to go with Elon Musk. I'd like to kind of have a chat with that guy.
Cool. And your desert island bottle? Can be one of yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to Bruichladdich. So we're just bottling, my brother and I, a 19-year-old that we bought with my dad in 2007. My dad sadly passed away quite recently, so that'll be a bottle that has a lot of kind of special kind of memories for me.
Yeah, cool. All right, good work. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers, Chris.